So the first thing that we're going to talk about in this video before we check out the skip derb is a rumor that is circulating in the Dragon Ball community when it comes to Raditz. So apparently there's a rumor circulating that Raditz is going to be revived by Android 21. Here's a partial image that is circulating on the internet. I don't know anything about this. I don't know who sourced this. I don't know if this is fake. It wasn't in the chapter, so if you guys know where this is coming from and who sourced it, that would be great. But as of right now, I don't see how this would tie into the story, but if it somehow does, we will resurface this in the future. Now, the first thing that we have to talk about in today's video is the fact that this chapter was surprisingly good. In fact, I would say that this was probably the best Dragon Ball Super chapter that we've had in quite some time, considering that we literally just spent almost an entire year on an arc that we already knew everything that was going to happen before it happened, because we already saw an entire movie that talked about the basic premise of what was going to happen in advance. But because of the fact that we're past that arc and now there's no movie content that can just keep pushing us forward, we actually have something brand new. And the interesting thing about this is that the chapter starts off with Goten and Trunks fighting crime, and before all of that resurfaces, we see that Qaaman is once again plotting revenge on trying to, resurrect the Red Ribbon Army over again, but he's very honest about his chances in actually doing this, considering the fact that a lot of the soldiers basically just went scarce, and his resources are really put on hold at this point. So they're not in the best of times. And what I find really interesting about this, guys, is a lot of Dragon Ball fans may not be completely keen on the whole idea of Goten and Trunks becoming superheroes again, but honestly, I actually think it's a fantastic way to give them at least slice of life or some role in the Dragon Ball series other than them being just two, bratty kids that will never age because the show will just, or shall I say the manga, because, the show obviously, but I'm saying the manga is never going to age them, and I guess they technically aged in the movie, but the point is that Goten and Trunks have actually had some level of development, and they're significantly more interesting than the characters that we saw at the end of Z, where they were basically implied to just be semi-retired young former fighters that weren't really doing anything over the 10-year time skip, and as a result of this, Goku and Vegeta were pushing them into joining the tournament, even though they didn't want to do so. And I feel like in creating Goten and Trunks and recreating them specifically as superheroes, X1 and X2, I think this is a fantastic way for their characters to have some level of involvement, even if they're side characters, because of the fact that this feels like something that Goten and Trunks would do. Now, granted, this isn't following up as to what we saw in the original Dragon Ball Z manga, but if you're going to rewrite it for Dragon Ball Super, I think this is a fantastic way, because juvenile young boys who are bored with all of the powers in the world and have nobody to fight and anything to do would do something like this, and I feel like this is a natural progression that you would see in characters that are becoming, young adults and teenagers as opposed to really young boys. And I feel like as a result of this, with all of the increased testosterone wanting to do something dangerous, even though it's not really dangerous because none of these characters actually pose a threat to you, is a great way to utilize Goten and Trunks. Now, in doing so, we see that Qaaman is actually trying to manipulate Goten and Trunks into fighting for him, and obviously with, once again, that young, powerful age of life, because we've all been at that age where we just want to fight, we just have so much testosterone, we just want, to challenge ourselves. Goten and Trunks go along with this to fight this big bad guy, and we'll talk more later about who they actually bumped into, because it was actually quite hilarious how the chapter actually ended, because I didn't expect what happened to actually happen. And also, the spoilers that were coming out about this didn't really go into detail about a lot of these things, so that's why it was rather shocking to see what eventually happened. So Goten and Trunks go away to, fight for Qaaman later on, and we get to a really interesting part of this chapter, which I actually think was the best part of this chapter, where we see Vegeta training Broly. Now, I feel like we haven't seen this too much in Dragon Ball. We saw it briefly with Vegeta and Future Trunks, during the Zamasu arc in the anime adaptation. We've seen, like, a brief semi-training-ish kind of thing between Vegeta and Qaaman. It's always interesting to see Vegeta training somebody as opposed to Goku, because Vegeta has a very brash and practical approach to how he trains people. And I feel like because he's significantly more aggressive, he's a lot more strict than Goku is, I feel like it adds a much more interesting dynamic that we don't see too often in this. And I feel like the way that Vegeta trains is very akin to how Beerus was training Vegeta during the whole Granola arc, and I feel like Goku's training is a lot more akin to the way that Whis actually trains, where he's a lot more, intellectual in how he's actually teaching you things, and he's a lot more nuanced in his approach. And I feel like as a result of that, I feel like seeing the dynamic of a character like Broly being pushed into becoming angry by Vegeta, but also trying to restrict himself and not going completely berserk, was one of the best parts of this. And it's really interesting to see a character like Broly training with Vegeta. I'm sure most Dragon Ball fans who are reading this chapter right now would probably have never have imagined a world in which Vegeta was actually training Broly, and the fact that Vegeta's training Broly is one of the funniest things ever, because, like, this is such a weird thing. Like, Broly's this evil villain that we knew from the original Dragon Ball Z movie, and we thought he was probably going to be in Dragon Ball Super Broly if we didn't know anything about it going into it, and now he's basically like a good guy now. And this is something that I want to talk about a lot more in a future video, but what Broly's trying to do is to basically become a lot more like Kale. And Kale actually figured this out a lot earlier than Broly, where in the anime version, not the manga version of Kale, of course, because the manga version of Kale never fully controlled her power, but the anime version of Kale was able to fully control her powers and fought alongside Caulifla in a more controlled, intelligent manner, as opposed to Broly, who's figuring this out. And if you compare the dynamics, I actually think it makes a lot more sense for Kale to have mastered her control a lot better because of her mental state. Because when you consider the fact that Broly's basically Tarzan, he grew up on a planet with bugs for the overwhelming majority of his life, his stability is not really well when it comes to his mental neurons, and he has a few screws that may not be fully screwed in. And as a result of this, it would make a lot more sense for Broly to have that haywire gene a lot more than a character like Kale, so it would make a lot more sense as to why Broly would take so much longer in order to fully train and maximize his abilities. And I love this scene here where Vegeta's fighting against Broly, and Broly, like, literally decks him right in the face, and Vegeta takes it, like, directly. Like, he starts bleeding, it's coming down. It's actually great seeing Dragon Ball have blood, because we don't get to see that too much in the anime, but, Vegeta decks it, and this scene reminds me a lot of another scene that we had in the Granola arc, where Granola decks Vegeta right in the face as Ultra Ego, and he just takes it and smiles. Like, I feel like that form is so perfect for Vegeta, and seeing him fight alongside, or shall I say fighting against Broly specifically, and just kind of like talking down to him, but also being, helpful at the same time. That's the amazing thing about Vegeta in this chapter. He's trying to bring the best out of Broly, so he's speaking to him in an aggressive manner, but he's also being helpful at the same time. He's not just being a jerk, and that's what I feel makes Vegeta so much more helpful, as opposed to in other fights when Vegeta's actually fighting in a fatalistic kind of way to actually defeat his opponents. He's not trying to help him, and this was something that we really just don't get to see too much from Vegeta, so seeing it and the battle that unfolded was great, and also how Goku's actually spectating and watching on, but in a situation like this, considering the fact that Goku's way more earthling and human than Vegeta is, considering that Goku grew up on Earth his entire life, even though he is a Saiyan, I feel like Vegeta can relate to Broly a lot more than Goku ever could, which is why I honestly feel like he's truly the perfect character to train with him in this specific sequence, and I feel like this was by far the best part of the entire chapter. Now, we do have another brief scene here where Black Frieza was mentioned. I thought that this was something that was not really shocking, because if you go back to, the initial part of the superhero arc, you could see Black Frieza in the sky, and then at the end of the Granola arc, Black Frieza showed up. So Black Frieza's still in the universe, and that's something that we definitely have to put into consideration. Now, there's this really interesting shot here of Sheelai. She's kind of forgettable because, you know, we don't get to see her too often, but Sheelai has a rather unique pose that I'm sure fans are going to have a lot of interesting ideas of manipulating this scene with more exaggerated parts in the future. And I could just imagine the fan base having a lot more fun with this innocently drawn picture of Sheelai where she looks rather enthusiastic, to say the least. But either way, going past the whole Sheelai stuff, I have to put that stuff in there. You know, she was mentioning the fact that Frieza's new black form is of no joke, and Goku obviously acknowledges this. And I feel like this was a perfect segue into what happens next, where Beerus talks about the fact that there's always going to be someone or something stronger than you. And even though this is not breaking the fourth wall, it kind of felt like this is the story kind of talking to us, the fans, knowing that Dragon Ball is a show where there's always going to be some big strong guy that's going to come up that's going to pose a threat to Goku and become stronger than Goku. And I feel like Beerus is really talking to the audience when he's saying this, more so than actually talking to Goku in universe. And what I find most interesting about this is that Beerus actually proceeds to talk to Goku and say that once you're stronger than me, you could become the next god of destruction. Now, this obviously confirms that with all of the crazy transformations that Goku and Vegeta have gone through, that they still haven't surpassed Beerus yet, and Goku obviously turned this down. Now, the thing that I've always said, and the Dragon Ball community has talked at length about, is the fact that Goku and Vegeta seem to be on path to becoming an angel and a god. Goku seems to be, you know, way more akin to becoming an angel, and Vegeta would really be the perfect god of destruction. And I honestly feel like it would be a perfect job for Vegeta. It's kind of like a chaotic neutral, as a lot of you guys were saying in a earlier poll today. We also see another quick thing here where Beerus actually completely forgot about Gohan, which I think is a rather in-universe kind of thing, because, I mean, Beerus shouldn't forget him because he fought in the Tournament of Power, but at the same time, though, when you really think about it, the way that Dragon Ball is written, Gohan is always disrespected by a lot of people until he kind of forces them to respect him, you know, whenever he just achieves some great thing. And he was talking about the fact that Bulma said that Gohan has surpassed Goku and Vegeta in this particular battle, which obviously gets Goku excited to know how strong his son is. But what I find really interesting about all of this is that this ultimately proves how Gohan's character works within the Dragon Ball story. He's not a character that works really well when it comes to making him the main cast where he always has to train and push himself. Gohan works best when he just comes in intermittent periods of not really training, but he gets really pissed off and he defeats a villain in a short self-contained story, and then he can kind of go off into working his job, studying bugs, and doing his things on the side, where Goku and Vegeta have that role in the series. And I feel like if you continue to use Gohan in this way where he just pops in and out and, you know, he always has like his moments here or there, I feel like that's the perfect way to write him, as long as you don't put too much focus on him. When we go back to planet Earth, this is where we actually get to Gohan, ironically, and what I was talking about earlier, where I was saying that there was a whole twist to this whole manga chapter where Qaaman goes over to Gohan's house, he starts attacking his house, and Gohan gets pissed off and charges out. Now, the thing is here that caught me by surprise is Gohan just goes Beast Gohan literally, like, off the bat. Like, this is a form that he could just use now, which is pretty scary, because if Gohan's this insanely powerful now, this is pretty much showing that they're gonna have ways to write him out of the story, because if he is this ridiculously strong and he can just flip it on like this, it's gonna make writing really, really interesting. Like, we're in a really interesting point of Dragon Ball history right now where Broly is an ally and Gohan just achieved a ridiculous transformation along with Piccolo. And because of this, I feel like we have so much power on our side. What is it going to be like for the villains of the other side? Now, granted, Black Frieza is still ridiculously powerful, but the power scaling in Dragon Ball right now is literally off the charts. And, you know, Goten and Trunks acknowledge that this is Gohan, and I found it funny when Trunks is mentioning going beast mode like it's nothing, because when he said that, I actually thought about Marshawn Lynch from the NFL. If anybody out there that actually watches football and, you know, does anything with your life other than just watching or reading Dragon Ball and actually understands the reference, I'm just here so I won't get fined, Skittles, Mars, all of that. Say so in the comment section below so we can have a little bit of variety to the Dragon Ball conversation. But the first person I thought about was Marshawn Lynch, Beast Mode, and also how he didn't get a chance to score that touchdown in the Super Bowl to defeat the Patriots when I hated the Patriots so much before Tom Brady left them and went to the Tampa Bay Bucks, and I didn't hate him anymore. But either way, the point that we're trying to talk about here is that he was able to easily do this, and the thing about Beast Gohan is that this is very different from Ultra Instinct and Ultra Ego, where Gohan literally just unlocked a new form that's comparable to Goku and Vegeta without trying. Like, this was the most Gohanist Gohan chapter ever, where this guy is just literally this powerful just because the plot just gave him a form and just made him stronger than all these characters that have been literally training with gods to try and perfect their abilities, and Gohan gets pissed off and just... he's this powerful. Like, if future Gohan only knew what he was even capable of, he would have been crying just seeing what the other version of himself was. It's like, why couldn't I ever achieve this? But either way, we actually see here that ultimately this becomes like a classic Dragon Ball gag where Goten and Trunks were supposed to defeat Gohan, but then they're obviously allied with Gohan, so there's really no fight that's going to go on, and Qaaman is completely busted. And the chapter ends with Goku showing up, sensing how ridiculously powerful Gohan's energy is, and there's no Raditz or Android 21 in the chapter at all.